Hello and welcome to The Dive, presented by Honda, Season 4, Episode 27. As a reminder, Kobe is finishing up his vacation, and I will be taking some time off this coming week, which is why we are recording this early on Sunday. And Phreak graciously joined us here today. Thank you so much. And Phreak, we've got to start this off. You know, it's been a big topic in the community, Phreak being disappointed with things lately.
Yeah.
People seem to really enjoy your disappointment. And as someone who has had to live with it for a lot of years, you know, it grates on me maybe a little bit more than it does in the community. But, you know, where's the positive, Phreak? Who are you proud of, Phreak? You know, I've really got to know.
Yeah, well, first of all, Azale, I'm proud of you and the rest of the broadcast team. I mean, you're all amazing. Let's be very clear about this one. You're all great. But as far as aiming at LCS teams overall, I am proud of Team Liquid. I think they have been steadily improving over time. I think at the start, I remember, Mark, you had a line about TL being this is the biggest one-game gap I've ever seen, which is an amazing quote, by the way. I love that from last week.
It doesn't hold up well.
It doesn't hold up anymore because now it's a 0-game gap. But TL, like, in their more recent wins,
you've ever seen,
have been way more convincing than they were in the first few weeks. You know, I held my TL stock, and you know, now they're a solid at 8-2 or something. I'm like, yeah, I made really good choices. Good job, me. Or I guess, yeah, even farther up there, 10. Yeah, so I'm really pleased with TL overall. Very pleased with, I mean, a little bit of Golden Guardians. Like, I mean, they are really clapping early game. There's still more to fix, but it feels like this is a team that has gotten better, split over split over split over split over split. That's really cool to see. And the Dignitas, I mean, they had the three win run. I think was really solid for that as well. So, you know, I am generally speaking very happy when new players get a shot or academy players get pulled up and actually get to do well. Like, it was cool to see Treats do pretty well. The other loss, not really his fault. I think everyone but Treats can be blamed for that one, that catastrophe. But like,
I think Double played pretty good that game too.
Yeah, I know. I'm being a little jokey about this one. The game is a catastrophe and Treats is fine. But yeah, I mean, anytime those players come up, so it's like cool to see Lolo come back. Cool to see Viper have a good Riven game. Like Poom and the rest of the Poom gang. Like that's been fun. Even though 100 Thieves are doing only okay, it's like that's fun to see a lot.
I was going to ask.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask along the line of the disappointed thing, though. Is this like, was this a conscious decision to start doing it, and then now that the community has latched on as well, are you like trying to make sure that you don't get sucked too far into being like, I know they like it, time to roast them now that the community likes it?
Right. I am hyper conscious of the like, wow, I roasted like 2 teams in back-to-back days. Like, this needs to not be a habit. Like, yeah, I would have probably laid into Dignitas a lot more than you and Flowers did, Azale, off that last game. I mean, man, that game was a stinker. Like,
I mean, I think crap. I said that was like absolutely terrible.
Oh, I know. I would have turned that up.
I actually love the commentary, how conversational it became, because there was nothing hype going on, and so like by the end it was like just 2 guys on a park bench, you know. Like that's how it sounded.
Yeah, and I mean, but yeah, I really don't want to be like the naysayer guy. Like, I want to be honest about, like, look, when something is really, really stupid, you got to say it. Like, I think it's okay to be a little bit harsh and you're being funny. That's generally the way I try to interact with my friends as well. Is like, I kind of do like the nagging, but it's meant to be in a positive way. Like, as, hey, we're positive friends, we're going to say this thing. I know, but you know, jokingly, right? Like, you know, when it's the clip that went on Reddit yesterday, and it was like, oh, it was award for award when Speak had died for
that was more of a joke, though.
Exactly, right? And yet that was the entire comment chain, because I read it this morning, was like, oh, I love Savage Phreak. He made fun of. I'm like, I didn't really make fun of Speaka. It's just the TSM joke. But like that's the thing everyone's pulling at now. Yeah. Ultimately, I really don't want to be the guy who flames teams, because I think a lot of teams are quite good, but. Yeah, I want to say, like, look, when something is complete garbage, I want to call it complete garbage.
I mean, I think that's the main thing, right? It's just being authentic with it, right? You know, if something is trash, call it trash. If something is great, call it great. And if you're doing that effectively, I think you're doing a good job as a caster. And you know, you're building hype when it's deserved, and you're criticizing teams when they deserve that too, right? Because it's like, you know, that Dignitas game was seriously terrible. Like, if I sit there and I am watching that game as a fan, and the caster is like, wow, this is really like some tight action here, you know, like, oh, maybe the Kog'Maw's still gonna win. Like, oh, they're just, you know, really picking their moment. Yeah, like you're insulting, right? You're just actually like insulting my intelligence as a viewer, as a fan. And people are feeling the same things you are oftentimes. Like we watch so much League of Legends, you know, we have the same reactions and thoughts of like, oh my God, this game is trash, or holy crap, this game is so hype, or look at that cool thing, and we get really excited about it, right? And I think fans like that when it's authentic, and I think that's why it's kind of resonated, when Phreak has done it, because it was just like your reaction was like, what the hell?
So vehement, right? Yeah. It's giving yourself the permission to be like vehemently disappointed, like just like visibly angry. I think like, again, really, really sparing, but when it deserves it, it deserves it. And that's like cathartic almost for the community.
That's why I like the analyst desk, man. Like we came back from that game and I just pretended to be asleep. Like I get leg room on the desk to do all like the weird stuff that like doesn't quite fit in the cast. Like, I mean, that's definitely one of the things I enjoy the most about it.
Mm-hmm. I still remember one time playing an ARAM with Phreak, and we were playing with some friend of mine who like hadn't played League of Legends in like months and months, and Phreak was just like hard flaming them, and they were like, "I'm new, like please, like I'm gonna be bad this game," and it was
hold on,
it was like you're trash.
Right, so moving on to not true. Moving on to the LCS, guys, we gotta get into the teams.
Been twisted every time you Phreak told it. I think I made like one comment because I forgot which player it was, and it was meant as a joke.
You thought it was your friend or something, but it was like someone who had like never played League of Legends. You were just blasting them.
It was my memory. It was one comment meant as a joke, not like, bro, just lay this. It's like that's not.
It was just really funny to me, so I thought I'd bring that up. All right. LCS this weekend. Big surprise for me was the fact that Cloud9 lost again, right? And this wasn't one that I think you can just be like, oh, but their draft though. They played pretty normal stuff. I think they just didn't play as well as their opponents. We saw them actually just get kind of like straight up ran over in a pretty normal game by EG. And EG, hasn't been able to necessarily replicate that success going forward. But like Cloud9, I think there are more and more games where it's starting to add up, right? They're still the best team in the league, I think, and I can confidently say I feel like they're significantly stronger than TL still overall. But they have been, close in quite a few games in the early game now. That is definitely true, and they have picked up 2 losses, right? So they're not looking so invincible anymore. There's more and more games where it's like, oh, you can actually beat this team as long as they don't just have winning matchups, across the board. It's feeling more like that.
I mean, even like some trends in terms of their losses starting to crop up. Like one for me is definitely wondering about their mid champion pool in terms of like, okay, Niski's great. I still have him power rank number 1, but this is a Syndra loss and a Cassio loss. I know he can play Cass. It was one of his best champs back in EU and Splice and stuff, but like doesn't seem to work well if Blabber is on Jarvan and he's on Cass, or like they're playing any sort of dynamic like that where one's more initiator set up for Blabber and it's supposed to be setting Niski up, whereas it works much better when Niski is like kind of set up and assist for Blabber. So part of me is like, is this just something they're going to be bad at? Like, should they just not be a Syndra, Cassio, Control Mage, Orianna kind of mid team?
I think it's okay personally. Like I'm as a fan, I really enjoy when teams have a style and I'm like, oh, it's this team, they do X. Like I enjoy being able to categorize a team like that, and it works in like 2/3 of their games. Like, yeah, they're mostly this, right? DoNB plays his Malphites and Nautiluses. Like, that's great. Like, I don't want that guy to be in a Azir main. I want the guy to keep doing his funky stuff. I love that. That's great. Pull back the Scion, pull back the Gallius, etc. That sounds great. So, yeah, I'm happy for it to be, look, this is Cloud9 is a team where Blabber goes in and the team follows him up, and they're going to int together, but it's not going to be int because they're better than you, or at least they're more coordinated than you, or at least they're more surprising than you're expecting, or their mechanics are good enough that it's going to work out for them. Like, it's not just that they go forward and have no brains. Like, they're clearly smart enough in how they do it, but that's where all their strengths actually are. Like, no player's ever like a complete, like the complete package where they're perfect at everything. There are strengths and weaknesses carved in and out. And like, look, the strengths of C9, at least for the parts that are like really active in the early game, are very good at going in and working well together. It's like, cool. That's where they are strongest and the very best in North America and among the best in the world. So just play those comps, because that is actually where your strengths lie. And that's how you beat teams like Damwon.
I guess I would argue, though, I feel like Syndra kind of fits in that, where it's like Syndra is great when you're having these early skirmishes and 2v2s and things, sure. like post 6, Syndra plus a jungler, most of the time you're betting on the Syndra side, right? I do think it's really strong. The ability to roam is less, but I think that it's like you can't pigeonhole yourself too much. If you're saying it's like only the absolute best roaming champions are allowed to be picked for him, right? Like what are you giving him? Are you giving him like Galio TF and and like LeBlanc, and that's it, because that's not enough.
Talia's good,
right?
by
like,
the way, just for what it's worth.
Yeah,
like,
fair.
There's some other undiscovered champions, but that's a tangential point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not saying it literally every time you have to play exactly this style. I mean, Niski has like 10 champions played among 12 games. Like, he's got a whole bunch of one-ups over there. There's an Azir game. There is a Syndra game in there. But like, my memory of the 100 Thieves loss from last week, like the other time they lost, was like, well, yeah, but that was Licorice getting slammed and like top lane was doomed, right? Like that was its own kind of special situation where they just kind of bled it everywhere and they just could never quite catch back up, right? They went for Wukong, which is a weak lane, but you try to mid-game spike, but if every lane loses, there's no mid-game spike. So, that was the one-off. So, there's parts where you can kind of give it a pass, whatever. The EG loss was like, wow, EG played it really well. I mean, yeah, you could just call that team stepping up, I guess. But that's obviously kind of a weak statement.
Yeah, I mean, they did still get one roam off and top dive pre 10 minutes. I forget exactly what time it was in the game, the Syndra move, but it's still like harder. And when like the Syndra is dominating mid, I usually feel like the way that the spillover happens is like the Syndra is like the ganker is coming to Syndra and they're making an impact on that lane to then free the Syndra, versus like when he plays Zoe, who is just like, F the wave, like, I'm out of here, I'm going top. I just don't think it's quite the same. And not that you can't play a similar style with Syndra, or not that, C9 will never win with these, but it's just not leaning into what seems to be your team's strengths. And I think there's enough champions that can play to your team's strengths that you don't need to explore this other style.
I guess I would just argue, though, that it's like when we look at Spring, for example, two of the champions I liked most for Niski was Veigar when he brought it out situationally, and Yasuo, right? And those were not roaming champions, really, right? Veigar is pretty slow scaling, and the Yasuo is kind of what you're describing with Syndra, where they would play Yasuo Gragas and things like this, and they would attack that lane, right? So I do think that having, multiple ways to actually play out the game is very important. I don't think that you have to play every single champion that is meta if there is one particularly that doesn't fit your playstyle. I mean, looking at his career stats, Zoe's is most played, but then it is Cassio and Syndra right behind that, and they both have good win rates, 21 plus plays, right? So it's not as though he doesn't know how to play the champions. I think if we want to say like Cassio is maybe too slow or something, I get that. I think that makes sense. But I do think if you're trying to go beyond doing what they've already shown that they can do, which is dominate the LCS, they did that in spring. They're on their way to doing that in summer if they can kind of continue bouncing back, but you have to have flexibility. And one of the things that I have always associated Cloud9's international success with throughout all their iterations is flexibility and playing different play styles, and Impact pulling out Singed. And I was like, well, no other team would have done that. No one would have picked Singed for their top laner here except Cloud9, and being able to have those surprises, I think, has often led to their success because they don't play just one way, right? And I think that, I would be against them losing that, because I've always felt like the fact that their players are flexible and willing to play all this stuff gives Reaper much more strength as a coach. Like, I think he's the best coach in the league and has been for a while, and he also is working with some of the best tools, right? And if you take away the breadth of options, then it does really limit you in some ways, right? And I wasn't the biggest fan of like the Wukong Senna. I don't think it necessarily played to their bot lane strength because they're so good in 2v2 and you kind of just auto lose that lane and so on and so forth. You give up some of your late game win conditions, but like, I like the fact that they could play it. Theoretically, someone has to be worried about it if it's like, oh, this comp is really bad into that. Well, now they can play it, right? And that's kind of my argument.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, to sum up, like, I still think that they should still edge towards that play style. Like, yes, he can play these other things. I mean, you look at Spring Split, right? Nine games on Zoe in that one, lost a single game on that champion. You compare Spring to Summer for Niski specifically, he's down 5 CSD in both splits, and he's up 300 gold at both splits, right? At 15 minutes. Like, he has a style that he is good at, and you should pick him champions that are good for that style. Like, I don't want this guy to be on Azir sitting back and farming, because yes, technically you can push waves on Azir and then roam down to bot lane and do the play, but like, you clearly have a tendency and a skill set that you're very good at. So just pick champs that do that thing. Zoe pushes fast, Rumble pushes fast, Galio TF just press R and they're there. Like, that's okay. Like, I still am, to come back to the first point, I'm happy with that guy having a style that he plays in 85% of games. And occasionally when it's like, okay, they're so sure to play TF, they like pre-counter pick and you're like, yeah, this is my one Cassiopeia game. It's going to work for the comp.
Yeah, I think it's definitely not like an all-in argument. Like you don't have to put every single egg in the I'm exactly like Doinby and only play his Malphite mid style. Like the Veigar counter pick is a great one where if they're going to play Azir against me, I have two options now. I can go around the Azir or I can try and destroy it with, the Veigar.
I mean, it's like it would be weird for me to see an AP cog game from him, only because even if it's the counter pick to Azir and the match is really good and the champ's good, I just don't know if it plays into his strengths or Cloud9's strengths.
Really?
Like that's see, like maybe it is good, right? But like,
yeah.
But it makes C9 show you a different style. And look, if that style works, then great. But we have seen when they don't play that style, it's one of their losses.
Yeah,
and that's the only concern I have, right? And
I
think it's okay.
I guess when I think of a lot of Cloud9 throughout this year, like how much friggin' Yuumi, Ezreal, Zoe style of stuff did they play? Like, because it seems like a lot from my recollection.
They did,
and I do feel like that kind of fits in with that same same kind of grouping as far as comps and being able to set up and control vision. You have to check a lot of the same boxes and you play it out in a similar style of play. Yes, it is different in that Zoe can be more proactive and be more the person starting it up and like do these crazy things that is sometimes where Niski shines, where he's like flashing and then onto a flash and then using that to flash his R forward and killing people. And like you don't get that explosive kind of sort of plays with like an AP cog. But as far as how you play out the game and set up around objectives and play around dragons and barons and everything, I think the AP cog plays very similar to how a Zoe does in a lot of those kind of situations.
I think agency though is a big thing to like not overlook. Like two things can be poke champs, but one can pick up like 3 flashes and jump into a team fight and do nutso stuff. And Kago's like, I hope my R accuracy was real good and I positioned well. Like it's definitely like once you get into how you actually play the champs and like pre-6 power, Cog is not a factor at all. Pre-6, you just sit there and hope you don't die. Like and like I think all those things are I'm fine with C9 experimenting a little bit during the regular season, as we say, but come playoffs, like I think it's good to have a more defined. This is what we do really well. We know it, and you're like even if we lose on it, we're gonna run it back or something. Like I like when teams have confidence in some of that stuff.
So what do you guys think then? Is this just kind of like 2 random games? Who cares? Or is Cloud9 actually getting solved, I'll say?
A little column A, a little column B. I think I think spring split, let's be honest, our teams were garbo other than C9.
Yep.
Like if like 9th place TL and CLG was a dumpster fire and all these other things that are going on. Like I just don't think teams are at that level anymore. Like I don't think FlyQuest and EG have catastrophically played worse than they did in spring. I think other teams have leveled up more to them. And that's why I think we're seeing C9 struggle a little bit more. But I still think
bottom teams can be threatening when they're on their game now.
Yeah.
I mean, 100 Thieves are in 8th and they're one of 2 teams who have beaten Cloud9. They're still only at 4 wins right now.
Yep.
Like I absolutely agree with that. I think Mark is
Immortals
is the most
as well
here. Yep. Immortals is totally solid.
Yep. So no, I agree. I mean, I do think that the teams have leveled up, but I will still say I still feel like Cloud9 is the clear number 1 team. I still do feel like there is a significant gap. I'm more pleased with the way that they are playing out the games than TL. TL though, deserving of a lot of credit. They are now tied for first, which is it's funny because I know you were talking about this before. I think before it went live, but Phreak was complimenting Mark on saying this is like the biggest 1 game gap essentially ever, right? This idea that it's like. Yeah, they're tied in the standings or they're close in the standings, but in everyone's head, it's not close, right? And I've seen other people kind of expressing that same sentiment. Travis had some sort of tweet like that. Like in the mental power rankings, Cloud9 is still so far above where TL is. I think it's maybe starting to change. TL has looked so much better in the last handful of games, I would say, than the earlier ones. Even in an earlier C9 interview, I think it was maybe their game after TSM or something, where Cloud9, I think it was Sven, was saying, oh yeah, TSM is clearly the second best team. TL kind of just like had random wins and kind of got lucky. And a lot of people felt like that about a lot of their earlier games, but they've been much more dominant now. They haven't necessarily relied on throws from their opponents anymore. It feels like they're more, playing around their power spikes and just kind of playing the kind of standard TL style of the last couple of years, which is this slow team fight style where you outscale your opponents a lot of the time. I'm not convinced that that's the way to win the split or to dominate internationally, because I think that's the same way that they played for years, and I think that's the same way that TSM played for years when they were dominating. I do think that a faster style of League of Legends is proving around the world to be superior. So I'm not sure that TL is improving from their like previous championship form, but obviously that's still pretty damn good. And they are looking like, a clear second place, and potentially a team that, given their kind of track record of improvement so far, could be a team to challenge Cloud9 later on.
Well, what's fun is TL plays Cloud9 second game on Sunday next week. Mm-hmm. So it's like that's the game I had my eyes on a lot of for. And I tend to agree, like, with your point that, yeah, faster League of Legends is probably better League of Legends, right? Get lane pressure to get free turret plates, stack the first 2 Drakes because they have like 5,000 total health each. Like, it's really, really easy. First Herald is worth 480 gold at a minimum, and probably also the turret. It's like, okay, there's actually a lot that you can do if your first 15 minutes is really strong. And at that point, you should probably keep the pressure up, right? It's weird to have like, oh, we're the really lane dominant team, but we're going to wait for late game. Like, it doesn't really work, right? So yeah, I do have concerns that a slow and standard style can be the actual top tier without simply outscaling your opponents, which is kind of why I'm like, hey, Cloud9, keep playing, this style. That said, in, under a week, we're going to figure that out, right? And that's going to be fun to watch for, because look, if it actually is really possible to just like keep up in the jungle, Brox has shown that he can do that, and your laners are so dominant. I mean, Jensen should have a field day in mid lane where anytime we see Niski roam, he's going to lose a turret plate in a lot of these cases. And it's like, okay, well, you might have gotten to kill bot lane 1 out of 3 times, but Jensen got 300 gold back from killing, your turret pressure. And now when Herald gets summoned, mid's cracked, and that didn't require very much, but well, Broxy just took top when you ganked bot. Don't worry about it. So, that kind of stuff could be interesting to watch for. A more reactive style, a more defensive style, played well, probably can match up pretty decently. But I think that's more about counter punching and getting something for the absence than just not dying to ganks, which is, not really a correct play style. It's not really possible, I guess, is really the way I want to say it. So, yeah, I'm excited to see how that plays out, because TL do look very, very good. I think they have powered up to the point where the fight looks competitive. And yes, the have shown some cracks.
I'll play the stinker in this. I'm like, are they the second best team in the LCS? Yes. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, they have so many of these things where you're watching and you're like, nah, I'm not. No, Broxa having 0% kill participation through 30 minutes or whatever it was, and ending with 25% after like a Nexus fight is like, that's just so weird. It's like I'm like in the Twilight Zone, being like, the game that was won without a jungler, and like, I'm like, what? How is this happening? And like, they're clearly really good. Core JJ is popping off in that game. Jensen's, had a weak early game.
JJ and Jensen have been monsters.
Yeah, yes. They're hulking out together. Tactical is obviously great. Impact is good, and I think he has his role in the team. He's not asked to shine, and so it's kind of natural he won't as much. But I can't help but look at it and go, nah, man, like you're not selling me. This is fool's gold. Like, there's something still wrong in terms of how explosive they are, their average game time, their average win time. They have the second best early game. They get these big leads off laning, like you're talking about. They absorb enemy pressure, but they never turn it into giant leads. They're the second lowest in terms of major deficit, which means the amount of time the enemy is basically beating them. People don't get advantages on them, but then they also don't close games quickly. And like, their jungler is not at all on the same page. Brox is one of the lowest on kill participation in the league. Like, there is still clearly a cog in this machine missing.
Yes.
And
I agree with that.
I cannot look past that. And
I agree.
It's like,
yeah,
they're good. They're so good. The players are so good. Yeah. It's just hard to
I'm on board. They're the second best team. They're exactly the second best team. Right. And they've been consistent, right? They haven't lost a game in weeks, 2-0 for 2-0 for 2-0, because they don't give up advantages anymore. And they're better than most teams, and they haven't played C9 again until week 7. So that's why the win streak has grown so much. They haven't had to play Cloud9 yet. Yes, I think we all agree C9's a better team. I think we all agree C9's probably 4-1 favored when they fight each other. That's, probably the odds I'd give. But, that one can happen. And TL look like a team that can make it to Worlds, and see how it goes, right? But I agree. Like, the whole point about like, if there was something missing, that lines up really well. I agree with that.
I mean, the 100 Thieves game, I think today was a pretty good example of that, where they gave up the Rift Heralds, they gave up 2 Dragons, they're down 2,000 gold, and then they did win this one fight at that 3rd Dragon, which then the game went great for them after that, and they were pretty much in control from there to the end of the game. But to kind of like sum it up, my issue with when you play the sit back and outscale and wait is oftentimes, you're more depending on your opponents not being able to push the pace of the game than you are on your own thing, right? It's like, even in that game where it did work out of that third dragon, I felt like there was opportunities where 100 Thieves could have clearly played it better around that dragon, where they have a five-man squad who's sitting in the river like this. Jensen is up over the wall by the blue buff, like towards the mid lane turret. He's split completely from the team. The other 4 from TL are here, and 100 Thieves are kind of half going near Jensen and like poking at him a little bit, and all just getting hit by paddle stars constantly, and half walking forward instead of just 5-man committing to attack the 4 or peeling off and attacking Jensen. Also, meanwhile, they're hitting the dragon. It was like very uncoordinated, and that felt like if you're in that situation and you actually win that fight and you continue to push forward, then the game can look so differently. So that's kind of my concern. But I will say CoreJJ, especially, I think was a monster. His Bard has looked so good. I also really appreciate the fact that like he's able to constantly play make and feel like he is getting as much out of his Bard as other players while doing a much less defensive build. Because like I've played a lot of Bard, and like the Bard ults, like they look really cool. It's actually not that hard to get picks and to get engages with the Bard ult. But what I will say is, in a 5v5, to constantly get bindings and to have a lot of effectiveness when you are not going like the dead man's tanky build is actually really hard, because he doesn't do that. He like always is going either, a speed up item or like a redemption, or like he's going more utility based items, which makes you super squishy. So the fact that he's actually able to like get in these fights and still have a lot of effectiveness while having a much higher risk build, I think is hard. Because if you misposition at all, like you're not a tank. You're an enchanter running up to like auto someone, and you can instantly die.
Yeah, he had like the phase rush build too instead of a guardian, I think.
He did phase rush one game.
Just like it makes him almost more defensive though, because it means Q auto literally lets him just like get the heck out instantly. So like that takes a quarter second, and then you're like, I got it, peace.
Unless there's CC, right? Where
well, sure, yeah. If you get literally stunned, you're dead if you're guardian or not at that point, probably. But yeah, I mean, valid point. Like, yes, Bard is a hard to play champion. The people who are good at Bard make it look really good. And that's awesome.
Vulcan this is prime support for first pro all team. That was not a good look to go convince people Vulcan over CoreJJ.
Sure.
All right. Well, TL obviously doing still really well. Another team that had been kind of up at the top, for conversations for a while. I mean, I even referenced the Sven interview after Cloud9 played against TSM, where they're like, clearly TSM is the second best team. TSM has fallen a little bit behind in the standings since then, not massively so, but they are still having, some of these clunker games, and they're only like one game ahead of this big grouping of teams, right? They're sitting 7-5. TL and Cloud9 are both 10-2, and then Golden Guardians, FlyQuest, and EG are right on their heels. So, how are you guys feeling about TSM?
Like
hit and miss.
I'm mostly on the misses. Like even the game that they won versus 100 Thieves was just kind of like, I don't know how to put it. It wasn't super impressive to me. And then obviously the game versus I feel similar about the FlyQuest game, where like Speaka just kind of ran it down early on and made a bunch of mistakes. I agree with you, Azale, that Doublelift actually played probably his best Senna game that he's played, but it was also still a loss, and so he has the curse still following him. They're definitely one of the teams where we're talking about playstyles with C9. Like, I would love if TSM just picked one already. Like, you want Fiddle mid Bjerg, great. You want, LeBlanc Bjerg, great. But like, just gotta figure out what you're trying to do. Are you Doublelift Callista popping off early games? Are you Senna? Like, what is your game plan?
Yeah, it feels like they're using Summer. I mean, this happens to TSM every time. And I don't know if we're giving them benefit of the doubt too often, or if they really just don't know what they're doing. It can be either. And I'm not trying to bias either way, because I just don't know. It's like, well, okay, it's summer and 8 teams make playoffs, and there's no championship points this year. So it's just summer split playoffs that matter. And as long as you get third in playoffs, you did it. And it's double elim. So as long as you're not like starting from 7th or 8th, you've got, a fair shake at it. And okay, there's a lot of ways to think that you can really wait, and hey, they're currently in third, so really it's going fine. Can they reach second? Maybe not, but who cares? They're not going to get picked first round. And you can kind of like build a narrative for like, oh, it's fine. You can just like do whatever for a while, and then they're going to find their play style, and then they're going to win at the end of the split. And it's like, well, that's not what happened in spring. And it's not really happening in summer either. I'm more leaning towards the camp of I don't know if TSM really just have a direction. I don't think it's as much they're trying to figure it out as they really don't know what they're trying to do.
Right.
Bjergsen individually, some of this is okay. Yes, he's playing lane fiddle. His laning stats are worse than Spring Split, pretty substantially so. He's like plus 100 XP and Golden Spring, and like averages negative across those stats in summer. So you know it is weaker overall. As him, Doublelift's in. Obviously, Doublelift is playing better than Kave was. Like, I think that's actually a pretty solid bot lane. I like Treats being in there as well. Like, this can be really nice. I would honestly like to see TSM just play bot lane. It's like, look, yes, technically you went 1-1 on Fiddlesticks and you lost your Zillion game, so support Bjergsen is not really ideal. I like this guy in LeBlanc and Syndra, even though we did lose on Syndra this split. Like, yeah, go give Bjergsen lane dominance. He's still a top 2 mid in the league, top 3 maybe if you like. Okay, yeah, it's probably Jensen Niski, but I think he's maybe number 3 then. But if you're gonna go for winning lane, he's top 2. He's behind Jensen. Great. It's Bjergsen. Let him do this thing. You know, let him do that. And then Doublelift and Treats or Doublelift and Bio if Bio catches back up. Like, that's really dominant. I know BB wants to be aggressive, but like, there's too much there to not work with that. Like have BB get a new play style going. You know, Corral speak it a bit. He can get there, and it's like just win through Bjergsen and Doublelift.
Yeah, it feels like that's the story with every Doublelift team after a while, where you know they're doing all this experimenting and trying other things, and then it's like, well, this doesn't work. What can we do? I guess we can give all the farm to Doublelift and hope we win the game, right? And, and they've won a lot of championships doing that, like on you know multiple squads on TL and on TSM and even with CLG. Doublelift has always been such a good win condition for the team. I am very much in the camp of it's not experimenting and who cares because we're going to make playoffs anyway. It's you don't know what's going to work or not, right? The Senna game didn't bother me at all. I actually think that was a complete throwaway game. They failed their invade and then died at the blue buff, and the game is like essentially over, right? Like you've lost all control on an early game jungler. Your Olaf that probably for sure wanted to go Warrior Black Cleaver based on the damage profile of your composition is now building a late Cinderhulk and is just worthless. Like that was a throwaway game. That was actually an FF, you know, at 5 in scrims game and remake. Happens. BG, go next, right? So that one didn't bother me, but you know, getting first and second matters a lot. So I don't buy that TSM is just like, who cares? Like, not only do you start in the upper bracket, you skip the first round and pick your opponent from like, you know, if you're first place, you pick your opponent in the next round, right? You know, so there's significant advantages to getting first and second. It's actually really important. You know, you're starting so much further along in the bracket that you get to a point where it's like you just need to win a couple games then, and you're in Worlds. You're in Worlds, right? So that matters a lot. I do think that TSM has potential. I do think that sometimes like people are quick to kind of like jump on the memes and stuff with like the Doublelift Senna and whatever, right? But I think that like we should, you know, it's fine as long as people are realizing like where things are really going wrong. Like that game, they were actually doing well bot lane with like, if I recall, against the lane that was pretty hard. I can't remember exactly what they played against, but like I was thinking that they were doing well, and I think Treats has actually been solid.
Yeah, even like they fell behind really hard, but then it was actually
against Ash Pantheon.
Okay.
And they started with kills because of the invade.
Yeah, but then even like team fights after far behind, Doublelift played the team fights well and was landing big Senna ults and stuff like this. He actually looked really good on it, and it was like, well, if you weren't 5k down fighting this Drake fight, you probably just hard smash it.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And Broken Blade got counterpicked, right? So we had completely no pressure against Solo. Like every single lane was losing. Syndra beats Orianna, bot lane had first blood in it, and top lane is counterpicked. Like that game is just boom. Yeah.
They were pretty resilient from a deficit, which was, I think, fairly impressive. And they actually were really good at kiting in fights. They obviously were so far behind, so they couldn't really just like hard engage into FlyQuest, which I think was kind of the problem. But I agree. I think largely, you know, TSM needs to kind of find, what their game plan is, what their style is. You know, Broken Blade feels like he wants to be that carry style, that dominant style, but he isn't performing on the level that it justifies those picks. And I think that's kind of like the harsh reality of it right now. You know, he wants to be someday, but you know, you're playing like Viper, and it's not working, right? Like it's one of those situations.
Is that the worst insult you could throw?
No,
you're playing
it's not even trying to like hard roast him. It's just more like if you're not going to slam the lane, the pick isn't worth it. Just blind pick Ornn and stuff like every other person, right?
So here's Broken Blade Spring. Okay, I'm going to list the stats. You tell me if it's spring versus summer. Okay, so in one of the splits, he is, let's see, negative 2.7 CSD at 15, plus 161 gold difference at 15, minus 4 XP at 15. In a different split, minus 5.8 CS at 15, minus 64 gold at 15, minus 350 XP at 15. Like across the board, one split's way worse than the other.
Yeah, I mean, I assume he's doing worse in summer.
Yeah, he is, and by substantial margins, right? Like, so it's like, well, yeah, sorry, Broken Blade, right? This guy was 14-14 in spring, 7-5 in summer, and his early game is just down across the board. And some of that's like, well, he's probably getting counterpick a bit less, like he's probably getting pushed.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
but he is objectively losing early game. Again, draft can be a reason for that, but he's objectively losing early game on a winning team.
Yeah, I was gonna say also play style can change. Like, if not saying I know exactly what their inner workings are, but if Kabe is supposed to be your weak side bot carry and Dardox is supposed to be your snowball jungler on the top side, now with Spica and Double Lift, I think the play style changes enough. But to your point, it's not like he's dumpstering kids on his own, and it's like, hey, can I please get some help? You know, there's a lot of stuff at play.
I mean, he's ninth in the league at CSD at 15, for example, right? So like the only people that are really below him are some of the people that have like subbed in and stuff like that, or been subbed out already. You know, so like he is performing near the bottom of the league as far as that goes. You know, and this isn't even like to roast him. I just think that like even with the eye test, like I seem to remember, you know, a number of like misplays and significant, you know, issues with him throughout the split. I just don't think he's playing up to the level that he has in the past. And I think that so many top laners are showing us that you can just play Ornn and you can play the tanks. Malphite has been very effective for players too. I think that you can play that sort of style. You can even add Set in there and some of these like bruisers that I think he can have some more agency on and have some more playmaking on, which I think he does enjoy. But you know, it's always kind of like that discussion that people have, especially when it was like the double of Bjergsen style teams of like, are there enough resources to go around kind of thing, right? And especially with jungle time, there often isn't to play to all three lanes. You have to pick and choose. It doesn't have to be the same lanes that you play to in every single game, but Bjergsen and Doublelift, I think, are both performing better than Broken Blade, and I think that it makes more sense to play more towards them, even more so with this meta, which feels like Dragon Soul is the game. So, you know, why are you playing topside? And I would just like to see them, you know, try to play a little bit more around that.
For sure. Play to your strengths, I think, is always a big thing. Like that's like when you're a jungler, you gank the strong lanes. You don't try to, you know, resuscitate the ones who are losing. Play to your strengths as a team. Same deal. Like, you know, play around your win conditions and try to shore up your weak points. Like, you know, sorry, Broken Blade, you're gonna be on Ornn duty a lot to split. That's okay, man. You're gonna, you know, you're gonna go to Worlds if you can keep up, right? And like TSM are in third right now, and that's with them not having a great identity solidified. They are a shoe-in for Worlds that they can just figure out to play around Bjergsen and Double Lift.
Yep. Turtle also hit 1,500 kills this weekend, so a huge benchmark for him. I want to say it was third player to do it or something.
Second, I think he's behind.
Second, it was just Double Lift and him. Okay.
Yeah, it's regular season specifically, so like there's a chance like Bjergsen has hit that faster because of playoff games or something. But yeah, regular season, second player to do it.
It's pretty impressive, and I do think that overall he looked pretty good. You know, at least in their win, I think he looked very good in the Ashe game. You know, he's playing pretty aggressively. Did kind of work well, you know, with Ignar and that Pantheon. They kind of used the CC there to make a lot of plays and even to punish Spica at times. You know, around mid lane, getting the kill there. They had a nice play where they, you know, got multiple kills out of a fairly difficult situation. So pretty pleased to see him back. I tend to feel like he was better than Mash, and this is something that, you know, you guys were talking about, even on the analyst desk, I think a little bit, the fact that FlyQuest seems to struggle to come to the conclusion that it feels like everyone else has already made.
Yeah, I think it was five weeks, 10 games of MASH before they went back to Turtle. And Turtle did an interview and kind of mentioned, I think it was after the win, that like, yeah, it was partially like a motivational benching, or like, you know, you're slumping a little bit and he had to get out of his slump. And I can totally see that for a little bit, but when you've given more than half your
4
games,
weeks.
yeah, 4 weeks. Okay, when you've given half the games to the other person, it's like, is that still a slumping thing, or is there more going on behind the scenes? They're not the most transparent organization with their decision making, but still, like going back to the Solo Viper one, like everyone watched 1 weekend of Solo and we're like, oh my god, this is so much better. I can't wait to see more Solo. And then like they continued using both into the playoffs, where they lost their first round before they finally were like, we should just start solo. And then they clapped the hell out of, I think it was Golden Guardians, and then like, made it all the way to finals. This time again, okay, Turtle goes 1-1 his first week, at least for, publicly available knowledge. Maybe he was slumping in scrims. One of the games was against C9 that they lost against. It's like, whatever. And then he's benched already. And then they go, the whole 4 more weeks before you see him again in week 6. And it's, and Mash had the worst laning stats in the league. He was making mistakes that literally cost the team the game in mid to late game.
The Ezreal Baron one.
Yeah, the Senna pick was terrible. Like all these, he's not playing well. And you run that for 4 weeks. It just felt like, how can you not, like, what is so bad with Turtle behind the scenes, I guess, is what it makes me ask.
Sure, yeah. I will say, like, the first week or two of MASH, I was like, okay, I'm going to, like, hyper-focus on seeing MASH again because, like, it's been a long time since we saw him. He was, like, mediocre when he played last time, years ago in the LCS. And I was like, okay, the initial laning was fine. And then he was, like, an aggressive player in, like, mid to late game team fights, but the aggression always paid off. Like, there was one against, I think it was EG, where, like, he dove in and finished killing Bang. Or maybe it was Golden Guardian, something like that. But, like, he helped dive in and kill an Aphelios, which is, like, really, really crucial. I was like, okay, that was a really aggressive move, but it needed to be made so you could win the team fight. Like, I dig that. And, like, there were a couple more moments where he'd, like, arcane shift forward on Ezreal and it would work. I'm like, okay, I see it. Okay, good job. But then, yeah, you start picking up the stinkers where I think it was, like, against Dig, where he, like, just hard throws a Baron by inting into the opposing mid laner. It's like, okay, that's the other side of the coin. And then, the very next week was when Turtle came in, right? So it's like, okay, like, he started kind of downhill after the first couple weeks. So the first few games, that was okay. And then it got bad.
Yeah, it was, for me, it was a fast turn. As soon as that Senna game happened, I was not already super convinced because this is partially my biases as well.
Not a
but
Senna enthusiast.
No, not Senna. I'm saying Mash.
I'm just kidding.
He's never been a great player. Turtle has had higher highs, even if he's slumping. It's like this feels like a short-term fix. Like I would have a hard time. Like I would bet my life savings that from career trajectory wise, like what's going to happen from here for both these players. Like I bet Turtle's going to get you more wins and have a higher win rate over the course, even from here on out of their careers. Like I could. That's why for me, it's like, how long do we need to let this? You got to get in form and slumping and stuff go before it's like everyone knows, in the back of your mind, Turtle's the better player. Put him in.
Mm-hmm.
Get those games in.
Another team that has made some, I don't know, surprising changes, I guess we'll say, is EG. Swapping out Jizuke, I was very surprised about, to be honest. I think that, Jizuke has kind of been the franchise player for a while for them. I think that he's responsible for a lot of their wins. I do think that he has a bad performances in their losses, definitely. Kumo also felt like he had been making, really big strides in improvement from spring to now. He has become a pretty solid laner. He was really bad in spring by comparison. So, seeing some of the steps forward there, it felt like, hey, okay, are the issues these players, or are the issues cohesion, or you're just trying to mix things up? What's happening? They swap in Huni and Golden Glue, and they play against TL, and that draft was just horrible. It was like you drafted top lane Karma without a carry, with a Senna as your ADC.
And an Ori.
It just made absolutely no sense. If it was like Karma Olaf, okay, I'll give it to you. If it's Karma plus a hyper carry, okay, I'll give it to you. But this draft was just abysmal. And as a result, like, I don't know if it's the players calling for these picks or what. We have no insight into that. So I kind of found it hard to really draw any conclusions from that because that was just so terrible. But then they come off that game and they beat Cloud9. And it's like, what are the conclusions I'm meant to draw from this, right?
Same team as before, just without Jizuke. Coin flipping it.
Yeah.
It's, and even within that game, Huni, I overchased and essentially put himself, in the situation where he died when he didn't have to, and put himself in an enormous deficit in the top lane 1v1, right? He then made it back up because Cloud9 forced this fight where he had TP and he came in, he happened to pick up 2 kills and he went off and he was incredible for the rest of the game. That was fantastic. But it was like, we saw the duality of Huni within the same game. It was like you overchased, you're way too greedy. You, as a result, lost all the farm at your turret, then got frozen on, got down 30 or 40 CS. It was terrible. Looked like the game's over. You find a way back in and you carry, right? He pops off. Golden Glue was also great in that Zoe game. Really was hitting so much poke. I felt like he was winning a lot of those fights for them, before they were even started, just by pushing Cloud9 members out. But it does feel so hard to evaluate, right? And I know Huni is not doing that well in Academy. That's one of the other things that kind of is making it a little bit more like surprising. You know, it doesn't feel like he's having a someday-esque performance in Academy where he's just absolutely trashing every single player, you know, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm sorry, like LeBron, you shouldn't be playing with the preschoolers. Like come back, come back to the main league. This is our mistake.
Leave me down here. This is fun.
You know, he's just dunking on 3-year-olds and stuff. You know, so very clearly it's not that. But I don't know. I don't really know what to think.
I definitely I'm with you. Like, I'm someone who generally does not like the whole like 7-man roster idea. I feel like it's usually a patchwork for problems with what should be a 5-man roster. I think,
or maybe 6, but you can't, because guess what? You know, you can't just sub in and out Jizuke, because if you're
right, exactly,
you can't sub in and out Huni for the same reason.
And like those teams can work, you know, Golden Glue coming in for Jensen or whatever, and like, oh, here comes easy Hoon for Faker. Like, there's moments where they have worked in history, but there's way more times that those teams sucked. So it's just like a sample size thing. And so, like, for me, yeah, this is a huge change in Jizuke being the franchise face of your team, both in game and out a little bit. And so I totally get that. Is it a better thing? I can't tell. I think if you're trying to play more standard, this is a more standard team. And if you think Bang is a top 380 carry, which he seems like he can be, then maybe this is a more consistent way to be good than the Jizuke-led roster.
Yeah, to me, my angle of it is, right, EG signed a new mid laner so that they could bench Kumo, because I think their Academy mid laner is also an import, right? So it's like they literally have to sign a new player because they're not benching Bang, right? This team absolutely relies on Bang. He like carries all their damage metrics. Like, yes, Bang is never leaving this lineup, and rightly so. The man is phenomenal. It's like, well, you must sign a free agent or buy someone's Academy player, native mid laner, or you can't, get Kumo out of your lineup. And replacing Kumo with like the next guy down in Academy is not going to help you either, right? Like, they really need something to happen in top lane. And so, like, well, okay, thankfully we have Huni, so yeah, we need Golden Glue here. What's nice is if they can ride out this split, Huni becomes a resident, Jizuke can come back in 2021. Wow, this team is really scary with Bang, Jizuke, and Huni in the lineup. That sounds great. And Svenskeren, like, great. You just have Zazel, the lone American. Like, let's go. We got imports. But like, that actually looks like a pretty good team. And they were pretty good last split. Ultimately, my read is like, they tried Kumo for as long as they could and said it's not working. I agree his laning's been looking better. Then they had the Riven game where they camped for him, and he craps on an Academy top laner in Deus, who comes in only because CLG like wants to help Ruin with burnout. They camp for him against Gangplank. They get him 2 kills in the first 8 minutes, and then he does approximately nothing the entire game. By comparison, Viper went equal and actually helped carry in his win, right? Like, just the next week on the exact same champion. It's like,
it got
that's
buffed.
why you signed Golden. Sure, yes, the passive does 5% more damage, and so your champ wasn't invisible. Like it felt more that
Phreak, look, I thought you did a patch note show.
Yeah, oh my god, but like, man, like I mean, that just shows me like they just do not want to play with Kumo anymore. Like, we're done. We can't play around you at all anymore. We literally can only play around Bang now and hope Jizuke can do his stuff. Like, this is not working. We need more texture. We need Huni to come in. We're going to sign Golden Glue. They should extend the contract. They get this guy in there, play out the split with this lineup. And yeah, like, they need more oomph in the late game, because they only have, like, Bang is going to be a passive, I will deal damage when it comes to me, and Jizuke is the only playmaker. Zazel got Alistar, which is great, but he's not going to get Alistar very much anymore. And then they're out of engage options. So yeah, I think they need Huni.
It's kind of interesting though, because it's like, if you talk about wanting to play towards bot lane and playing a more standard style, and you guys are advocating for Huni for that, right? It's like you're advocating for the man who's going to fight top lane no matter what, right?
Like, if this team is happy being 6-6, they could keep the old lineup, and it's fine. They'll like win enough team fights through Bang, and Jizuke's going to win enough team fights through split pushing, and they have a hole in top lane, but who cares? Like, that team can make playoffs in the LCS.
Is it really just like Kumo's fault? Like, I guess I don't buy that. Like, I feel like when I looked at a lot of their games, this was like, where is your coordination? Where's your communication? Like, a lot of their losses are like, whether sometimes it's Jizuke, sometimes it's Kumo, sometimes it's, no matter what, there's these situations where one person is clearly doing one thing and has in mind that their team is going to, like, push on the other side or clear vision or doing whatever. And it's always separate objectives. Like, it feels like it's rarely coordinated together.
So that's true, and part of what Artemis said in his interview when asked about, hey, with all this lineup and whatnot, he's like, hey, we want Huni in for late game shot calling. Like they want him to be a voice in the team, because you're right. Like the other half of it is absolutely coordination. I completely agree with you, Azale. And it's they want Huni to be the guy who's like, we're grouping and going here, and like he will lead in on Gangplank and like throw down a barrel and a Zolt, and it's like, we're going, and they will follow him up. What was great is like that's what worked in end of spring split EG, was it felt like Jizuke and Svenska and were like, we're going, let's do this, and that was wonderful. For whatever reason, that stopped happening, right? Because you're right, like it was working, right? They went like 10-1 to end the spring split. They were the only other team to take a game off Cloud9. They narrowly lost to FlyQuest, I think, right at the end of playoffs. Like we are ready to go and say, okay, EG, go rekindle number 2. Keep getting there. For whatever reason, that fell off, and coordination again is the culprit. And so it's like, okay, let's add a new voice. Let's go.
Yeah,
I think that voice.
I think also it's not like, for me, it's not like these teams is like they're a 10th place team trying to make these changes. I think they're a 5th, 4th, 4th through 6th place team. Yeah, trying to punch into the top 3 to guarantee their spot, and they think they might have a better option. I don't think Kumo is a total black hole in the top lane.
I agree.
Like he might have been in spring. I do think he's been better, but he's not so much better, I think, that you can't look for other options. I think Jizuke is very coin flippy. It can be scary to want to bet your season on that. And so while putting in Huni does make your play style play around top, I still think you're a more standard team. Even if you are a top focused team, at the very least, your mid laner is playing more control mages. I mean, Jizuke was playing Corki, which was fine, but I still wouldn't really consider I want him on Ori or these front to back team fighting comps around Bang. Even if it's a GP up there, or it's like another carry, Camille or something, you can still make your 4-man core stronger. Whereas I felt like Jizuke needed to be his own man when he was getting his pick. So I don't know. I'm curious to see where the experiment goes for EG.
All right. Well, how about CLG then? Because CLG, you sounded a little bit less convinced on Mark. How you feeling about them?
Oh boy, I have some thoughts, man. That both their games this weekend were just so. I mean, I guess which one should I start with?
EG, it happened first.
All right, so there's the Riven game, which people have memed enough about, I think. Unless someone wants a shot at the leaving Riven up versus Viper. I know I was found guilty, even though I put my best defense for that draft.
Crumbs was hard trolling, but you had a case where you're defending a man who's like, I murdered them, and you're like, not guilty.
That's not on record.
You're like, no, actually it is. We're in the courtroom right now.
That was coerced. Let me tell you what really happened.
He's holding the gun. You could see it.
No.
Losses this week were digging Immortals.
Crumbs was like, I'm pleading guilty for the other person.
Yeah, the dig one was bad. So then the one today actually tilted the hell out of me, because it is so fundamentally what sucks about this team. I actually thought Immortals screwed their draft up so hard. You have 3 losing lanes with no proactivity. The Kog'Maw is supposed to scale, but you pick a weak bot side and then a tank top who got counterpicked because you, in your first phase, picked all 3 lanes. And then your jungler is, just Graves, but without anything to help him get through the early game or try and influence the early game. I thought that they were going to get crushed, but then they don't control any Drakes, and they way over prioritize getting the Camille ahead, where they're dropping Rift Herald top to push while the other team's getting their second Drake. And then they're bringing their 4-man or their 5-man down to contest the Drake when you picked a 4-1 split push comp where the Camille's supposed to go and, threaten to take things because you're trying to get her ahead. And their objective control is terrible. They're in that early game where they had the advantages, they mess up their dive top, they mess up their gank mid to hand all these kills back to Immortals, who really shouldn't have had any chance there. And then even at the end, Rune is this hyper-fed guy. If you watch the last, I think it's the Elder Drake, where Pobelter shuffles in and they manage to kill Insanity, but he dies for it. Mm-hmm. Rune is farming the wave mid as Pobelter is getting ready to end the game. They're the most miscoordinated team ever. And then he shows up late to the fight. And this is the guy who you put all your resources in.
Yeah.
It's
I'm really cold on Ruin. I'm really cold on Ruin.
I hate Wiggly's early and mid-game decisions on when he splits map and what he's trying to do. Why you split map when you have 3 winning lanes and allowing them to their Ezreal Braum to have any sort of pressure against your Phelios Thresh lane? I don't understand any of their early game plans. And they go into all these horrible split maps. They did it last week where they let Deus just get crapped on for no reason when you don't like you can try and fight back against these decisions.
Yeah, they camp Deus, and Wiggly is like, I took his Gromp, guys.
Yeah, you can't dive that bot lane from the previous game. Go defend your GP. And like they don't, I don't know. Their early games are always terrible for me. And then their mid to late game coordination is bad as well. Like I'm so cold in this team. I was cold in this team all split long. And then CLG was complaining that we weren't hotter on them despite having some of the worst gold differences at 15 when they were like 4-2, because all of us have eyes and we're watching the games and realize they're not strong despite what their record says. And then they're complaining that we're not saying they're better than they are. It's like, no, we're analysts. Our job is to evaluate the strength of your team, and we're not convinced.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was my stored up CLG rant for a split.
I mean, I think it's fair, right? I think that, you know, if a team is getting some weak wins or wins only against the bottom opponents, and you know, you're not even convinced by those, then you can expect them to start picking up losses later. And I mean, I think to a lesser degree, it was the same reason that we were being somewhat negative on TL, despite the fact that when they were 6-2, most people were still negative on TL because the games didn't look good. And a lot of the games were dependent upon throws from their opponents. You still got the win. The Nexus still blew up. That's still good, but it's not going to make me think you're as good as that record is showing, right? And I think that's true with CLG. I would agree. I was really disappointed with Ruin today. Ruin has had some of those good pop-off games on Camille in the past, but like it's hard to get more help than he got. And it's hard for Alorum to get less help than he got. And when I checked in on the game, and it was like, you're up 5 CS, and this man has been tower dove like 3 or 4 times and like zoned off the turret for multiple waves, and you're up 5 or 6 CS at like, and it was like 124 to 118 or something like that. Like, you know, this is a while into the game. I'm like, how has no advantage been established? And you know, I kind of got the idea of the Camille of like, okay, well, Kog'Maw's still low mobility, so maybe you're going to like come in and one-shot the Kog'Maw at the fight. But then in this like penultimate fight where you've put all your resources in your top laner, you got him a super fast Triforce and all this stuff, and that's great.
Yep.
He hook shots onto the Ornn and like just loses the 1v1 against the Ornn and then has to run. And I'm like, this is literally the person that got every resource against the person who got nothing.
Yeah.
And he's doing more.
So yeah, looking at Ruin this split, like this man needs to be on perennial Ornn duty. So looking at his champion pool, he is 0-3 on Jace and he is 0-1 on Gangplank. All of his wins are like Volibear, Aatrox, Ornn, Malphite. Like give the man a meatball, let him press R and walk at the enemy team. Like that's where all of his wins are. He's undefeated on Volibear and Aatrox, which like, hey, they can even be lane dominant, right? They can actually scrap. That's fine. His laning's actually solid. He's a good laner. I think his team fighting on non-tanks is atrocious. And honestly, like, CNN have Pobelter, who loves playing Azir, and Stixxay, his laning's bad, but his team fighting is fine. Like, this is another team where it's like, look, just give him the TSM playbook. Just like, get a meatball up there, and 5-on-5, and you'll go above 50-50. Like, just take that play style. It's like the most standard League of Legends you could possibly play, but that's what they're going to be best at.
I guess you know, I was just going to say, I feel like it's one of those situations, though, where it's like they want more than 50-50. Because I agree that I can get them 50-50, but like... But
they'd be above 50-50 if they stopped picking Jason Gangplank.
Like, I mean, I hear you okay, for sure. Okay. But it's like we're saying, okay, Stixxay is actually a really bad laner. Well, okay, his stats, but their lane as a duo. It's not just on the marksman, as every marksman player ever knows. It's you know, it's the support plus the marksman that and whether it's they have bad synergy or you know one of them is bad or the other's bad or they're both bad, who cares? Their lane does poorly in 2v2 almost always. He does have really high DPM or at least quite high DPM. He's doing fine in team fighting. That's great. But you know, if we're saying it's like, okay, we're unhappy with lots of decisions that Wiggly is making. Ruin's not playing well. Your bot lane always is losing lane. Like, how far are you expecting that team to go then, right? You know, like we're not listing a lot of positives here.
I mean, yeah, even
it's like Stixxay and Pope are pretty good at team fighting later, but you're expecting your jungler to lose, your bot lane to lose, your top lane to lose.
Yeah, I mean, even the Rune point that I was going to say, like, his laning is okay, but he takes a lot of really risky fights and usually loses them. He has 1 solo kill this split and 18 ISO deaths. And ganks do count in as ISO deaths, but he's leading the league in ISO deaths, I'm pretty sure. He definitely is leading top laners. And it's like...
And he got benched 2 games, unless you're doing ISO per game.
Yeah. No, that's with 2 less games. Yeah.
Yeah, that's rough.
Next is Impact with 13 ISO deaths, but he has 5 solo kills. So including ganks, he's winning some of these 1v1 slaps to the end, that top laners sometimes get into. Rune loses all of those.
Yeah, but by default, ISOs are almost always higher than solo kills just because of how the game works, because junglers exist. So like every champion, or almost every player will have the stat look bad, but it's worse. I'm agreeing with you. I'm just giving some context.
Yeah, for sure.
Except for maybe bot laners. Sometimes that can be a bit different, right?
Yeah,
like,
then
you have to get 2v2 kills and stuff like that.
Because you're rarely alone, or it's like a bot laner is sometimes just out in the side lane too much and dying, and then ISOs can be a problem. But I agree. They're not looking as good as their record suggests, and their record isn't looking that good. So it's not boding that well for ZLG. Dignitas had a great game. With Viper's Riven. That, like, honestly, credit to him. He is the best Riven in the league. He got the pick. The Kennen ban made no sense, and he played great, and he absolutely dumpstered him for that ban. So good on Viper. I will say though, I was just really surprised that he got put in the first place. I think Lorlo has been better than Viper. I think that Viper can be solid, but he I think was getting outperformed by Lorlo straight up, and their game today was just horrible. Really, really, really terrible game.
Can you tell me how you really feel? I feel like you're holding back a little bit.
The Wukong pick made the Wukong for Wukong top. I don't remember the exact draft order, but I remember still thinking it was like flexible and stuff. It just didn't make any sense with the rest of their draft, right? They just like grab. This is one of those situations where you're just like, oh, Wukong's a pretty good champ. Guess we should pick it. And
got a full poke comp.
Yeah, you have like poke and peel back, and
get
protect
the engage,
cog.
squishy engage damage champ.
And then you have a dive champion with no one who could dive with him in a hard losing 1v1 where you don't have jungle priority.
Jungle without problems at all.
What? Like, that's not Ribbon's fault. That's the coach's fault. That's the draft's fault. You put him in a 1v1 is Wukong against Ken, Trundle against Olaf, and Trundle's your like only hope as a dive buddy. Like, he's not going to do anything. It's a tank Trundle. He can't get back there. You have Cog Lulu. Like, what was that? That was horrible. And they just give up literally everything. They literally lost. The only time they could test something was for Soul. And Hotzer wasn't even there, and they got shit on. They got dumpstered 4v5.
I love when Azale gets riled up.
I know, I love it.
Hotzer wasn't even there. He was late to the fight, and his team had already won.
They were down 5K already.
Yeah, they were down 5K, and they lost 4v5 when Hotzer has a fucking cannon alt flank with the summoners up. And he didn't even need it. It's like, what? What is happening here? Just what a trash game that was.
Yeah, I love how this like the dive is just evolving into each of us pick a topic and rant by ourselves for 5 minutes. I have my CLG one.
Yeah, I agree. But hey, Digger what 3-3 with this lineup. They 0-2 the first week with it. Then they got the 3-win streak, and then they lost the game today, right? So it's like, okay, like 100 Thieves were like 1-3, brought in the new lineup, and now they're like 3-5 with it. Dig brings a new lineup, they're 3-3 with it. CLG with the new top laners, 1-1. That's kind of the same record. EG's one with this lineup, it's the same record. Like, there are a lot of teams like Ross hopping in, and it's like, are these much better? Are they not? I'm kind of this whole lineup like together. By the way, just like Phoenix in and Dardoch in is like the new lineup to me, even with the Viper in and out. I agree. Go back to Lorlo. Like, don't get me wrong. I want to see him back in. This team looked pretty promising. Yeah, I mean, neither one is like really dominating lane ultimately, but I think he is the overall better player. And this is another team where it's like, well, bot lane and Phoenix are, well, I mean, honestly, like, they have 4 good players.
Yeah.
Like, Phoenix is good. Like, okay, get him back off TF, but we're seeing Chain as 0 bans and he's still solid. He was the one winning lane on Zoe, it felt like, where like he at least pressured Demonte, right? Like, Demonte was under turret and had to like E backwards, still get hit by paddle stars. So like they kind of had one at least equal lane in 2 winning lanes. Still didn't do anything, but like, yeah, he's good even not on Azir. Aframu is still, to me, the number 3 support this split. Number 4 in some other people's minds, but like still quite good. Johnson's obviously quite solid. Was playing Ashe before it was cool, which is saying something because she's made of ice. And overall, this is a solid team. Dardoch can play the bot side. Lorlo can be on farm duty on a tank, and they need team fight.
I definitely think they need to make sure that they still find good drafts. So I think like while they are way better than the initial, Dignitas lineup, I still think, like, you're saying Afro is probably their best player of the split. He needs to be on something more proactive than a Lulu. And I think there is
4 Thresh and 3 Bards. Stick with it.
Yeah, Thresh, Bard. If you want to start picking up the Alistar, he's always had a good Alistar. There's enough stuff in the meta. I think you can make it work for him. Dardoch as well, another great player when he's in his element, which is pretty much an aggressive play style with a mid laner who's going to combo with him. I think Phoenix is pretty hit or miss, but at least like you can win some games on those hit games if your bot lane's also in the right position and Dardoch's in the right position, and your top laner he's going to get the Alorum treatment. You're going to get
your top laner
targeted. You're going to be on an island, but that's your role.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, Afro has been really good. I think their bot lane in general has been their shining light throughout the split. Even when they were 0-8, I was like, hey, bot lane's pretty good though. The Lulu game today, I mean, it was like whatever, I guess, but like even just the spell thieves didn't make any sense to me. Like it was the slowest. It was the slowest item transform for Sightsone of the split by a lot. The average was something like 10 minutes or 10:23 or something, I think it was. And he transformed to like 18, 19 minutes. You have no vision, you have no priority. And it's just one of those things that like, it just seemed weird to me because like, this guy plays a ton of support. And really the only time I find it good at all is when you're playing against like melee champions who also can't all in. Because that's pretty much the only time you can actually consistently have it procced and not get punished for it, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't even play it against Thresh because like you walk up to auto Thresh to proc it or whatever.
He'll walk up and flay you.
He just flays you and you die. You can do it against like Braum and Tahm Kench, and like that's like mostly it. It's just Relic Shield is just too much better. It's too easy and consistent. And those style of supports are very susceptible all in, so the extra health is often useful. So it didn't really make a lot of sense to me, but that was a very minor point. Overall, I think Afro has been great, and I'd like to see him continue to get champions where he has the ability to be proactive.
Yeah.
Last team I think we wanted to touch on here was Immortals. I'm actually really pleased watching Immortals for the most part. I think Alorum and Insanity have been fun to watch. I think Insanity has, had some like key moments that if he did it differently, they would have won a lot. They would have won more games, right? Even in the Karthus game this last weekend, there was this situation where it was like, I don't know, was that guy's in that game with you, Phreak? Where it was by the Baron pit.
And he should have killed. He should have killed closer on the Baron.
Yeah, you could have actually maybe got a Penta and Baron, and he still played it well and got like a triple kill, and overall he was great that game. But it was like one of those things where I feel like you can fix some of those late game situations just with experience, right? Where you got too hyped on the Azir game and he like shuffles in and throws the game where they should have had it locked up for sure on EG. And then the Orianna Shockwave game, I can't remember. I think that was against TL. Where if he just hit that, they win the game. Like those are tiny things that can be fixed, with lack of nerves and maybe some more experience or whatever. I was a little bit sad that I felt like when I watched that Karthus play, I was like, ooh, maybe you were scared of throwing the game because of those previous ones. But overall, I think he has a good mindset. I liked his interview, him talking about it. He didn't seem to take himself too seriously. He was joking a lot about like, getting the best usage of the Cogmok passive of any player and stuff. And like, he is kind of bringing out this somewhat unique play style in that he is playing not what is just like
weird
LCS
stuff.
meta.
Yeah.
He's playing solo queue meta. And there's a reason that these picks are solo queue meta. Karthus is super overpowered.
Oh
it's
yeah,
like actually so broken. They tried to put it in mid lane with these buffs, and it just ended up making it insane in mid lane and better in jungle than it was anyway. And Kog'Maw, AP Cog, if you watch a lot of the pro LCS players playing solo queue, they're playing it all the time too. Like these are great picks that other people aren't picking up as much. And he clearly has, very high levels of mastery on them. He's been great on the control mages. So I've been enjoying his play, and Alorum, they're not playing to him, but like he feels like one of those solid journeyman style top laners where he's willing to play the various tanks and kind of withstand pressure and team fights pretty well. And that's kind of mostly what you want.
Yeah, I have pretty like quick thought on Insanity just because I put him 6th on the tier list. I think a lot of people were surprised by that. A lot of that has to do with the fact that like mid laners are getting subbed out. Like there's I think like been 13 mids or something.
Something like that.
Yeah, so it's like okay, everyone who's been subbed out basically has to be under this person. As well as like limited sample size of like. All right, how good's Phoenix? Well, we've seen him like 3 games and it's been really hit or miss. So that's hard to say. The people who I was closer with was like DeMonte. I know he was memeing me on Twitter a little bit because of that. And I think it's just when I watch Insanity, I'm not blown away by his laning. I actually don't think he's a great laner. And we're talking about these late game mistakes. I think it's very easy for people to be like, so why would you put him that high? And I think he actually plays a lot of situations super well, and they're just not like eye-catching solo kill moments like Bjergsen and Jensen have. But he's not making big mistakes in the early game, which costs his team the game. He actually almost never dies in a dumb way. I can't even like think of, other than maybe the CLG game, which just happened. On COG dying a little bit too much. But before that game, I can't remember him making big dumb mistakes that killed his team in the early game, whereas plenty of the other mid laners in the league have had these like, oops, I threw the game moments in pre-15. And I think that's something where consistency, especially in the mid lane, is something I value very highly. And he's good. Like if you put him on a team, I think that had primary win conditions somewhere, because right now I think that's the biggest problem with Immortals is like they don't have a star player anywhere. Like he would be a good
Smithy, but he's not really the take over the game on Graves kind of player. Like, he had good Graves games, but that's not him. Apollo gets good damage, but he's not quite that player either.
Exactly. Like there's a lot of good players on Immortals, but I don't think they have like this is the guy to play.
Smithy is the force multiplier guy.
Exactly.
And the forces are not that strong.
Like if I put, on Golden Guardians, even for Insanity, like that was one of the thought experiments I did. Like, would that potentially be a better team? And I'm like, I'm actually not sure, because FBI slams lane, closes a really good jungler. Even in Academy, Insanity played a lot of like Galio and Globals and like ways like supportive mids in previous splits as well during his time on TL Academy and stuff like that. So like, if I look at some of that stuff, I'm like, maybe he could be. And it's just like Immortals is in a weird spot with some of their players. So just want to throw my little 2 cents
even
in
with
on.
that. They've been really close against a lot of top teams, right? And I do think that it's like what you're describing is exactly what you want from people who are playing this style of champion. When you're playing Karthus and Kog'Maw and these types of champs, you have to withstand and farm well and scale up and not die a lot. And he's doing that.
Yeah, right now, of course, they are a game outside of playoffs. They are 1 game behind 100 Thieves, 2 games behind CLG, 3 behind like 4th through 6th with Golden Guardians and co. But they're 2-1 in the second round robin. They beat CLG and TSM in the second round. They were 1-8 in the first round, so oof, they got to make up from that deficit. But a 2-1 start means okay, if they're about that good, if they're a 66% win rate team against TSM and CLG, that's a pretty good playoff barometer. Like those are absolutely playoff teams. You keep that going and you beat teams like Golden Guardians and FlyQuest and EG and those other sort of middle-ish teams, okay, you're in, you're going to make a run. You might win the first round as well because you just face TSM again. You just do the same thing over again. Like, okay, if that's your level, if you can retain that level, you're in there, right? This is actually a solid team that we're really excited about. But the problem is with 6 games to play, they're starting in the lower bracket without picking up like +3. Right? Like they've got to get to 50-50 from 3 and 9, which is probably not possible for them. But I mean, we'll see.
All right. Well, now on to the Honda MVP discussion. Thank you, Honda, for supporting us as always. We are going to take a little bit of a different twist on it this time. We are going to talk about, generally speaking, the MVP voting is like best player in the league, period, right? It's usually the best player on the best team wins it. That's very common. We're going to look at it more from the perspective of this team would be like the most screwed without this guy, right? So maybe it's not the best player in the league. Maybe it's not someone on cloud 9. Maybe it's a player on a bottom team, right? Like maybe it's Afromu. I'm kind of curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, I always think stuff is interesting. For me, like MVP, I often, because it's valuable and not best player, like the best player on the best team tends to happen, but I always try and vote like best performance, like who is actually playing the best. Maybe, that often means on the best player on the best team because league is a zero-sum game. And so like if you're performing well, there must be someone performing poorly basically on the other side. But I do like to ask questions like, if you remove this player, are they good? Is there someone who could do this player's job if you slotted them onto their team? And these kinds of questions to figure out that stuff. I always think those are good ways to try and come up with like value, because that's what I'm trying to get a little more. Because otherwise, especially early in the LCS, it was just Bjergsen every split because he's the best player. Even if, hey, Jensen had 50 more kills than him this split, didn't win an MVP. Never going to win an MVP because of that. I'm still salty about that split. Anyways, on to the actual question.
Sure.
Player that I think would be irreplaceable basically for their team. I can't actually say Jensen this split because I think Bjergsen could do a lot of what he's doing.
Or even not even just like you're not replaceable. More like who right now, which team, is the most damaged by losing what one player, and like what player is that, right?
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
if you take Someday off 100 Thieves,
they're so screwed.
And they don't just get to get Licorice, they have to get someone else, right? Someone new. Are they just, you're the worst team in the league now, congratulations. If Dignitas lose Aframu and Johnson can't lane with anyone else, are they even like in a single game? Like these are more what I'm trying to get you to go for.
Okay, I got you.
Because we know, well, like I won't speak for you guys, maybe it's changed, but for the most part, everyone has been like Blabber, Niski, like maybe Vulcan. There's some whispers now about some TL members, maybe a core JJ you're hearing in the back, maybe a little bit of Jensen action, but for the most part, it's been only C9 discussion for MVP. So we're trying to move a little bit beyond that and talk about some of the really key performers that are making their team much better than you would think, are making their team function when it otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah, and I want to hesitate around like trying to backdoor into value over replacement, where it's like what other top laners are there. It's just like imagine they become a practical target dummy. They're like just generic top laner X that's like vaguely LCS level or jungler whatever. Yeah, it's like Someday is top of the list, Closer is top of the list, and actually probably my choice. Sure, there are technically stronger junglers and his name is Blabber, but Golden Guardians are winning because of Closer. And if you give them a generic jungler, you could give them McSmithy, and I'd be like, yeah, no, this team is nowhere close to the same. Yeah, they're a barely playoff team who will maybe win one match, whatever. Like, yeah, he's not going to win the MVP overall, but like Closer is the most mandatory player. Someday, pretty similar there as well. Although, I think 100 Thieves are a bit less screwed because I think Cody's son is solid and Ryoma's getting better and better. And, in a split or so, 100 Thieves could actually like not have Someday and be decent. We actually saw parts of that before when they had other roster swaps going around. Back when Someday smurfed Academy for an entire split and the team was okay-ish. I think that's an easy one. Bang, another one where it's like, Bang is on the list, but there are other pieces of EG that will work pretty well, right? Huni has been known to take over games. Yusuke has done that the same. Golden Guardians do not have a team without Closer. He's like just like by far the guy for me.
You have an option as or should I go next?
I mean, for me, it would be between Afro and Someday, I think right now. I just feel like Dignitas, nothing happens on Dignitas without Afro making it happen most of the time. Maybe that's a little bit less true with some of the changes and things, but like in general, I feel like he has been such a catalyst for the team. Their laning has been good. I think it's so hard to actually look good as a support on a team that is truly bad. And they were 0-8, and he was still having like performances that look pretty good. It's so easy to be that support who's just like 0-6 because your team is losing every lane and you have to get vision and you're the one to go die for them over and over. And like that wasn't happening to Afro, which I think is impressive while he was still being able to stay proactive. I also just think Someday has been such a catalyst for the team. Like I agree that Cody's son is good, but it doesn't feel like 100 Thieves is like has any like pressure in lane without Someday, because Cody's son is generally like he's pretty good in lane, but it's more about his late game team fighting. Ryoma isn't getting it done really in lane either. Jungle Contracts had a game or two here or there where he really ran over the opponents, but besides that, Medios wasn't dominating jungle. Contracts hasn't the other games, so it feels like he's pretty critical. There's you still could consider a Cloud9 or a TL player or whatever if you want, if you think that they would really fall apart. But I tend to think that it's like Cloud9's playstyle, for example, like if you took away Blabber, would change completely. But I still think they have so much talent that they're a really, really good team.
Yeah, for me, I was going to pick Core JJ, actually. I think Jensen, I mean, it's tough between the two of them. I think they are standouts on their team, and they are tied for first. But I think about how passive this team is, and I can't imagine how much more passive they would become without Core JJ. I think Jensen does a really good job of getting, like, leads and advantages, but he's not always, like, I'm a start a fight myself. He did it a little bit during the Shen game, but outside that game, not as much. And Core JJ, 3 Bard games, 2 Blitzcrank games, 2 Nautilus, 2 Thresh. Like, he's always so important in their fights and getting them started that we're talking about what is almost the most passive team in the league. I think they have the second lowest combined kills per minute, which is kind of crazy for a second place team. And so, like, with Broxah not being able to get things done, I just can't imagine how this team would function without Core JJ. Like, would they even get any kills? I'm not sure. Now, obviously, they're really good players outside that, but he does. I can't imagine it.
He does a lot.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's what we're thinking for the Honda MVP discussion this week. Now we have some Twitter questions here. This first one comes from Marty Bagatti. He says, with the rise/return of non-traditional champs in the bot lanes, mages, Wukong, Set, etc., and also just the general existence of Senna, should any teams be considering the 2018 Fnatic approach and put a soul laner as bot lane/support? My initial reaction is just a no, because I don't think that there are so many different ones. You said the existence of Senna. I think that's key. If you try to do this, people are going to ban Senna out every single time, and then you're kind of getting pigeonholed into some of these atypical lanes that I just don't think works well.
Yeah, so Gregor's bot lane. Yeah, I would be curious to find a team that just plays full non-marksman down there, and it's like no, we're the Doinby of bot lane. We're just it's mostly set Yasuo down here and stuff. We're gonna go have fun and find the other combos. I think you can get a lot of mileage out of those comps, because teams don't know how to lane against them. They're for sure going to miss the openings where there were plays, and they're going to miss the openings where you can all in them. There's something there. It requires a lot of effort, but I don't think you have to necessarily move players around. You could. I think it would be okay. I mean, we saw Perks make the transition pretty well. He won, a bunch doing that. So, possibilities are certainly there, but I wouldn't just sub out Bang for Huni because we want to play some Wukong.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is if it's just like, hey, could you ever flex your players instead of flexing the champions, like that is more likely. But if you're talking about the actual Fnatic one, which is they bench Reckless and put Whippo in, no one should really be doing that.
Yeah. And that was on Reckless anyway. Reckless was like, marksmen aren't viable. I'm on the bench. Get in there. That was what happened.
That was them making
I'm not even overstating it. That's
he
actually what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's literally marksmen aren't viable as Ruler goes and wins an LCK split.
Yeah, and as Uzi was playing only marksman ever and slamming LPL.
Yeah, exactly. So whatever.
Those are pretty good players though. Ruler and Uzi, not bad.
Not bad.
All right. Next question here. This one comes from Quinn. It says, truly a stupid hypothetical. Great. Love it already. Any players in NA who could be slotted into C9 to make C9 better with time to build synergy, or is C9's 5 as good as it gets, or is Reaper just as good as it gets?
I really can't think of too many. I wouldn't even say Licorice for Someday. I'm not convinced Someday's actually better right now, let alone synergy being a concern.
Core for Vulcan is a consideration.
That's probably the closest that you can get, right?
I think Jensen for Niski is a consideration. It would be a different style, right? You would be a different style. You would have less of a hard roamer who is ready to follow up Blabber at all times, but you have a more dominant laner to ensure mid is never showing up when Blabber does stuff. So there's a case to be made. I'm not necessarily on board either, but there are maybes. But I would be hey, look, it's work with C9. I would never, as a GM, make that choice. But, I have a short list of if someone leaves, here's who I'd want to get.
Just to play devil's advocate a bit, consider Sven's performance on TSM versus Sven's performance on C9. Consider how Vulcan looks. Still good. Vulcan still look good, off C9 versus on C9.
Clutch, right.
Do you now reconsider it all, right? Because these players have looked so much better on this team. Does that mean, and I'm not saying it does, but I'm posing the question, does that mean that C9 just makes you better by nature of being on C9 because their organization is better, because Reaper is a better coach? Because if that is the argument, then maybe someone who is performing at a similar level to a C9 player would be better than that player once they're on C9.
I would give the examples of, Jensen still being great off C9. I would give Zeyzal still basically being more or less the same player on EG. So I think this is one of those, everything came together and force multiplier. Everyone's amazing, better than they would look in any other situation. And that's why it feels hard to move them out of it and then put someone in who's expected to also get that multiplication effect. Because even Blabber, as great as he is, I really don't think you could take him and put him on at some other team, and he's still the greatest all-time jungler we've ever seen through the first 50 games or whatever, those stats were saying. I think he's still great. Still maybe the best jungler in the league, but not all-time greatest looking.
I agree.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's hard to replicate this, especially the style that C9 is playing with some of these other players, and you don't know how they would plug and play. But I do think that there is potential. No one really knows until it happens, right? And I think that's all I was trying to get at with the Sven example. Yeah, because so many people were like, Sven is washed up, Sven can't lane, all he does is late game stuff, and even then he's gonna mess up, and this player sucks, right? Basically. and he's pretty much the agreed upon best marksman in the league now. And I do think that it's just important to consider how sometimes the pieces around a player or the player that the style that the team is playing don't always fit, and you can have a resurgence with different pieces around you with things fitting better.
Exactly, which is why we blame TSM for holding Sven back.
Yep, there you go. All right, now we got some anchor questions. Remember, you guys can send us the questions on Twitter using hashtag the dive LOL. You can also search anchor.fm. The dive, if you Google that, that'll come up. I should actually just learn what the real page is. Maybe it's anchor.fm/dive. I don't really know. Anyway, Google it until then. First question here is from Connor Weisser.
Hey guys, love the show. Assuming that your favorite video game is League of Legends, what is your second favorite video game to play and or watch?
Bold assumption that I like League of Legends.
Yeah, how dare you?
First off,
none of us like League of Legends. Are we talking all time or like current?
I assume current.
Okay.
Because current for me is Path of Exile, because I'm trying to listen to more audiobooks, but I need something to do in the foreground. I cannot listen to audiobooks in the foreground. So I play Path of Exile, mind off, running through maps, and I listen to the first Law trilogy.
It's good. How many challenges done are you? I hit 22 last night. I'm slacking a bit. How far in are you on this league? You have no idea. Okay.
I hate this league. Harvest sucks.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Harvest is the stupidest crap I've ever seen. I hate it. For someone who's trying to be mine off, it's like, build. You're playing farming games now. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not playing this. I'm solo self-found. Okay. I don't even care about trading.
Okay. That's funny because Harvest is really good for solo self-found. We're
I'm
getting
sure
off topic.
It is.
I don't know if it's an important one.
We should talk more off this.
We will. We'll talk about it after the show.
Topic is fantastic.
I know. For me, actually, it's right now. It's Valorant. 3 months ago, it was Legends of Runeterra. 3 months before that, it was Teamfight Tactics. I just bounced. Well. So I didn't think I liked auto battles, and I played TFT and enjoyed it. Yeah. I knew I liked card games. Like I played a lot of Hearthstone before LR came out, and I played a lot of Counter-Strike before Valorant came out. If Riot makes a single player RPG, they'll have just completed the quadrifecta of all my favorite genres. So if you want to beat a certain Polish developer to making a nice cyberpunk noir future RPG, Riot can have all my money. But regardless, yeah, right now it's probably Valorant. It's a great game.
Sweet. All right, for me. I mean, if I have to talk like all time, WoW is obviously up there just because that's literally what got me into esports. That's literally that game changed my life, and I think kind of like led me to where my career is now. Currently, I'm really enjoying Last of Us 2. I've been playing through it. I have some frustrations with the game, but overall, I really like it. I saw like the critic reviews are great. I know the user reviews aren't good on it, but I don't really know exactly why that is. My only frustration, I would say, with Last of Us 2 is I essentially feel like it's an exploration game. It's like I love like looking around these environments because the game is gorgeous, and playing it on PS4 Pro and on HTV, it's really fun to look at. But my only frustration is that like sometimes you'll like pass a barrier and you're just like locked into the next zone or whatever now, right? But there's no way to really tell when you're going through one of these areas where it's just going to like go to a cinematic. So you like go through a door and then it just kind of like goes into this like mini cinematic where like a block falls behind you or whatever, and like, well, shit, I still wanted to see what else was back there. Like, I missed my scavenge, or like I missed materials or things back there. Because if you're playing, especially on the higher difficulties, there's like really limited ammo, and like finding, upgrades and things is actually important. So that's my only frustration, but it's a really beautiful.
How far in are you?
Oh God, a lot.
How many hours?
Quite a few hours. I don't know. 30, 40, maybe more.
I haven't played the game, but I can parrot some people's critiques.
Okay. Yeah.
I won't.
We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it another time. But enjoying it so far.
Hey guys, my question is, with mages being included in the bot lane meta for a while now, mostly just Syndra, but I'm wondering why Azir is not being played as an option as well. It scales with attack speed really well into late game. It has utility, some gank assist. So I'm just wondering what could make this more viable, or why it's not being played.
I'm going to go for a quick answer here. Azir is really hard to play. Like, Azir is monstrously difficult, and it requires, I would say, over 100 games to get to an LCS level. Now, that said, if, Doublelift wanted to spend 3 weeks of solo queue grinding on Azir to get it ready so that they could flex that to bot lane, he could get it ready, right? And that might be worthwhile, but that's the amount of time it takes to get a pick of that level ready to go. for the benefit of, well, we could blind Azir and then flex it at some point, when like that's a pretty small amount of benefit when other things could be practiced. So I will usually give pros the benefit of the doubt in that kind of term, because it just the time to benefit ratio is not there. But that said, again, we talked about it a little bit earlier. I would love to see more non-standard bot lanes, because I think there is stuff on the table that's not being used.
I think for me, this is purely hypothetical, and I'd love to ask a smarter player this, but I wonder if it has to do a lot with trading pattern, because when you play Azir, your mana is not actually great. And a lot of what you do is you press W in a position that can hit the creeps and zone the person out, and then you kind of like position with your soldier trying to be in the middle of them. And if they try and walk through it, you hit them, and you kind of, it's very positioning dependent. And if there's two people, and like it's harder, especially if they're double range, like the way that you want to actually lane Azir and trade with Azir is mostly this kind of like W auto to get the short trade. If they take it again, you Q auto again, and you don't want to do too much beyond that. Whereas a lot of other bot laners can spam their spells a little bit more in terms of the mages that go down there. And Azir is really not WQ, WQ, WQ. It's mostly just Wing and trying to shove the wave until you get more mana items and stuff. And I think he would actually really struggle with trading patterns when there's more than one target.
Especially with the builds that people are going these days, which is actually a lot of people have just, at first it was Ludens, then it was just Lost Chapter. Now it's like not
Nashor's
even Lost Chapter. Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like Dark Seal and a Doran's Ring. Right. I also think that, one of the things that, I'm a trash Azir player. I've only played a handful of games. It's really hard. But, one of the things that I always really felt is that your cooldowns in the early game are actually very long, right? And I do think that the soldier positioning that you're talking about is really key, especially if you actually use your Q to move the soldiers to attack one person. There's the ability, if it's double range, for them to just move around that and continue to attack you. You cannot fight back without your soldiers fighting, right? Like your actual auto attacks are pretty trash. And I also think that the ability to all in Azir is very high. And I think that you would be really susceptible to engage supports. Any engage support plus something that can follow up, I think would be incredibly dangerous. So I do think that Azir might struggle to lane, and also, like Phreak said, it's just so hard. All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of The Dive. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Phreak, for joining us and for not being disappointed in us. Appreciate that. And thank you to Honda for making this show possible, as well as for making my car possible. We will be returning to our regular schedule next week as we all return finally from vacation, because I'm going to be gone unless Mark decides he wants some vacation. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Who knows? But that's going to be it.